Joseph.
And I'm Nick.
On October 16th, we attended a screening of Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street, at the Philosophical Research Society. Afterwards, we participated in a discussion with the Happy Horror Time guys, Matt, Tim, and Jacob.
Mm-hmm.
So we have that recording. But before we listen to that, we wanted to talk about the documentary a little bit more, only because there were some things I wanted to say that I forgot to say. Also, I think most of the panel had a greater fondness for the film than I did, perhaps. So I wanted to explain that better.
Yes, we're definitely kind of on the more negative side.
And I didn't want to bring my negativity to the panel. But we really enjoyed doing it. So,
and to be fair, we were talking about the documentary, not the film that it's semi-explicating.
Right. So I think for us, it'd be fun to talk about both and then play the audio. Also, our sound is a little quiet because it seems like we're not used to having things in our face, because it's not bad, but the other guys are louder because they seem more used to that. But yeah, so what is the documentary Scream Queen about? A retrospective look at A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge, and the life of its lead actor, Mark Patton. So Mark Patton stars in A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, playing a character named Jesse. And that film ended up, when it was released, it was sort of like made fun of because it's very obvious that the character of Jesse represents a gay guy.
Mm-hmm.
Years passed and it has become a camp classic, but that portrayal really affected Mark Patton's career. So the documentary Scream Queen talks about that. The documentary is directed by two people, Roman Chimienti and
Mm-hmm.
Tyler Jensen.
Mm-hmm.
Mark Patton's one of the producers. So there's that. And then talking about A Nightmare on Elm Street 2. So that's the sequel to the original, which was a big hit for New Line Cinema.
Directed by Wes Craven. Mm-hmm.
But the sequel is directed by a different person, Jack Sholder.
Yes. And they were all directed by different people until Wes Craven returned, of course, for New Nightmare in 94.
The sequel's written by David Chaskin, and it's a departure from the first film, because where the first film really focuses on Freddy haunting people's nightmares, the second one is more about Freddy trying to occupy the body of this young man, Jesse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it breaks with the convention that the original
established.
Well, was it establishing it or just
or presented?
Establishing sounds so strong and direct.
Well, like they had a plan.
Yes.
But yeah. I mean, I'm sure they didn't think it was going to be the hit that it was.
If it was, Wes Craven would have kept the rights to it.
Right. So I think the fans didn't love the departure from the story, and then also the fact that, I mean, you know, nowadays we would use language like subtext and coded, but back then it really just seems like a gay ass movie, because the main kid is, I mean, there's a reason the documentary is called Scream Queen, because the character of Jesse does, as they say, scream like a girl. And then he has his little best friend who, the way it plays out, it does seem like, you know, maybe he likes his friend. And
like there's homoerotic tension.
There's homoerotic tension between Jesse and his best friend. Then you have Freddy Krueger, who's telling Jesse he needs his body and he wants to be in him.
Yes.
Then we have the coach, like the gym teacher,
played by Marshall Bell, yeah,
who apparently is gay, because we see him going to a gay bar and wearing like leather gear.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the famous scene where the coach gets attacked by Freddy Krueger in the gymnasium in the showers, and
at night,
and he's naked. You see his butt, and Freddy sort of like whips him with his razor hand. So, you know, in modern day, as an adult, if you watch it, whether you're gay, straight, in between, you would interpret this as like, wow, this is really gay. But there are a few things I wanted to talk about related to the documentary that we really didn't get a chance to mention. And Please jump in at any moment. But the first thing I wanted to talk about is that the documentary seems sort of biased towards presenting Mark Patton as a victim.
I think there's arguably an agenda to highlight the victimization of gay men in Hollywood in the 80s. Yes, and there is truth to that.
And once you hear our discussion from the event, you'll hear me say that what I was most struck by after completing the documentary, and that night when we watched, that was my third time watching it.
Same.
I'm most moved by Mark Patton. Like, I feel a sadness because, and I think all of us can relate to this in some way, of looking back at our lives and certain moments that, like low points, decisions we made, things that happened to us that left us with some sort of trauma. You may not have known, like you couldn't have seen it coming. And when I think about this documentary and Mark Patton, it's like he just didn't stand a chance. He was this obviously gay young man who was given sort of an incredible opportunity because Mark Patton moved from middle America to New York to be an actor. And he, in the documentary, he talks about how like he just didn't fit in and was always told, he's so beautiful and he, is bigger than this place. So he just takes his ass to New York and let him tell it. It was like a fairy tale. Like he immediately started getting work, making money. And then his first big gig, he's cast on Broadway.
In a Robert Altman production, opposite Cher.
Kathy Bates,
Sandy Dennis,
Karen Black.
Oh, the lovely Karen Black in that, yes.
And that play's called
Come Back to the Five and Dime, Jimmy Dean.
And then what happens? Robert Altman decides to make a motion picture and cast the
original cast.
So now Mark Patton's in this movie with all these people.
Mm-hmm.
So he has an amazing start. Then he gets cast as the lead in
the sequel to a hit film.
And then everything just devolves from there. But it's, early 80s. You're this obviously gay young man who gets cast in this big movie, and then HIV/AIDS is looming. So my feeling is that he just didn't stand a chance. He was never going to be like a Hollywood male lead.
Rock Hudson died a month before A Nightmare on Elm Street 2 came out.
Right. I mean, even in 2024, we don't have openly gay leading men.
It's still very contentious. People are still afraid to come out of the closet because it's prohibitive.
And then, of course, not knowing that HIV and AIDS would ravage his life, because then we find out that Mark Patton is HIV positive, and there was a period. We don't know when he contracted the virus, but he says that he did right around the time that the cocktails came out.
So like 96-ish.
And that at a point became very, very sick and had to get off the cocktail and take the old school drugs like AZT because he had ended up contracting tuberculosis. And so, of course, the AZT really wrecked his body. And he's very vague about what his life was like in those decades that he was out of the limelight.
There is a detachment from intimate detail, yes.
But then, he does sort of revisit his life, saying that I moved to, like rural Mexico, like lived on a dirt road, which is Puerto Vallarta. That's where we see him living with his partner's husband.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And he has a shop where he sells paintings. What we see of his home, it looks beautiful. But he talks about how he really didn't understand the celebrity he had gained from A Nightmare on Elm Street 2 until the documentarians for the box set back in 2010 reached out to him. And of course, they play it out like they had to hire a private investigator to find him because he was in hiding. But that's when he was reintroduced to the world and started going to conventions. And originally, it wasn't well received. Like people, he says people would make fun of him, like, "Oh, you're the one from the gay one," and
well, a lot of fanboys at these kind of conventions tend to,
right,
present a certain homophobic way about them.
But then as the years went by, and then this documentary came out in
19.
but it seems like it was filmed in 2015. And around that time, when he's going to the conventions, now the film has sort of this camp following, and now he's more well liked and I guess able to make quite a bit of money going on these convention rounds.
Hmm.
But I I have questions for Mark Patton. Like my inner investigative reporter has a lot of questions for him because he talks about how when the movie came out, his agent told him you can clearly carry a movie, which I would argue is questionable, but you'll have to be a character actor because you can't play it straight. So my first question is why didn't, like, if Mark's dream was to be a working actor, why didn't he try to pursue a
because
career?
because I don't think his dream was to be a working actor. I think his dream was to be a star, and the world was not ready for anybody that seemed gay at all to be a star.
So I agree with what you just said, but that's not what he's acknowledging.
Yeah, I mean, but it's hard because you can't. It's too difficult to wrap your head around the culture being so hateful, rather than he places the scapegoat that he creates for himself are the screenwriter and the director, and I don't think that it's not that they're not entirely maybe not complicit. It's just that they had no control over that. They did not want him to be a star.
Well, right. I want to get back to that, but also this idea that like he's presented as a victim when he actually had like the most amazing start and then chose not to continue because it wasn't the way that he wanted. So to me, it's like, well, you made a choice not to pursue this career.
And I think that's what I wish that the directors of this film had also had some culture critics or film historians to weigh in on the number, in retrospect now, of gay men that were working in Hollywood in this period because they wanted to act. You could do it. There was space for you if you did certain things. And
Which
and then also what happened to a lot of those people and compared to Mark Patterson or
Patton, right? So that makes, from my perspective, I feel like Mark Patton is kind of lucky because he's still around to speak about it. All the actors you mentioned who did choose to try to work and play these bit parts and character roles, or as character actors in these bit roles, they end up dying of AIDS.
Yes, I think most of the people that stayed in the industry and that were gay and having sex with men.
So, as you'll hear in the recording, at one point I do ask if we think A Nightmare on Elm Street 2 is a good movie, and do we think Mark Patton gave a good performance? And I think people think he did. I don't. I think
He did not go to acting school, and I don't know that the director was clearly preoccupied with other things. So, and this was a rushed production. I don't think it's a good performance, but I think he's doing the best that he knew how to do, and he was young.
my question would be, if we're being honest, here's this obviously gay guy who starred in this movie that did not come out the way they expected. So then he seems extra gay. The movie itself is not great, and his performance is not good in my opinion, especially when he is, so his best friend who plays that guy,
Robert Rusler.
that's who it is.
Hmm.
Okay, so Robert Rusler is Jesse's best friend Ron, and Robert Rusler is who you would want as the lead in this movie. He's, not unlike Johnny Depp in the first film, like an attractive guy who, reads as like a teenage dude. Robert Rusler is arguably more attractive than Mark Patton, doesn't read as gay. Just everything about him is more like what you would expect this character to be.
But as the director Jack Sholder is talking, I think maybe subconsciously realized that what you needed in the character of Jesse is
More vulnerability.
vulnerability, fragility, and a Robert Rusler doesn't read that way.
No, he doesn't. But what I'm saying is that I think it's like the cards were stacked against him
Yes.
in every direction. Like you're opposite this guy who is what the audience would probably prefer, even though the character requires someone who seems more vulnerable, like the male version of Nancy from the first film. On so there's all that playing against you. To me, it's like, okay, so then you aren't getting the roles, or you don't believe that you'll be able to have the career you wanted, but also, are you qualified for that? I don't know. Like, I just,
Well, right. I likened it to, if acting had been his uh, dream, it's like Jessica Lange in King Kong as her debut, being like, maybe I need to learn a couple things and then come back to trying this again.
Mark Patton is in a movie called Swallowed that came out in 2023, I believe.
Was it
I
what
reviewed it on our YouTube channel on my own, and
2022 with
2022.
Cooper Koch and Jenna Malone,
It's
directed by the great Carter Smith.
And I enjoyed that movie, but Mark Patton plays a character. He's like the villain in the movie, and by far, well, he takes a movie that is pretty dark and sinister and turns it into camp with his performance. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think he's very good in Swallowed. So I didn't say this on the panel because I do think it's negative, but I don't know that Mark Patton's a great actor. Like you said, he didn't take acting lessons. He definitely hasn't honed his craft because he stopped acting after A Nightmare on Elm Street 2. So to me, it seems kind of like, wow, you really thought you were going to be the next Brad, or like you were going to be like the Brad Pitt before Brad Pitt. You don't have any of those elements. You're not a hunky dude who reads straight. I mean, even Brad Pitt's acting is so questionable sometimes,
Oh no, definitely.
but he's definitely better than Mark Patton.
But it's that realization. I think when you grow up and realize that the world is going to see and treat you in a certain way, and it's like he accepted once he had that epiphany. He accepted that rather than rail against it and be like, "No, I am not just this. Look at what else I can do."
This might be controversial, but I think sometimes, like when you're part of like an underrepresented group, sometimes it's easy to say, well, I'm X, and because of that, I've been mistreated. And it's like, okay, that's not possible, but also sometimes it's just that you just aren't very good at your job, or you're not what they wanted because you're just not good at it. And I think I'm not I'm not just gonna like vote for his cause just because, oh, he's a gay guy. And yeah, in the 80s there was a lot of homophobia within the industry that did block a lot of people from having better careers. But so that does, like, that is true. I'm acknowledging that. I just don't know that Mark Patton is lucky that he can tell his story now, but I don't know that he is the best spokesperson for how homophobia affected talent back in the 80s.
Well, I don't know that he should be the spokesperson for that. I think the documentary would have felt a little more well rounded if the people that could speak to that,
Yep.
talking about like the PTSD really of having to live dual lives and be in the closet and also be in the limelight, and what that's the warping effect of that. But we don't get that, and I don't think we should place all of that on Mark Patton's head. And I believe I say during the Q&A that I think he's lucky that he is around, unlike a lot of his colleagues, to be able to speak. Like he gets to have this renaissance, if you will. And I think he's also a testament to, really, we all have our own paths, and life is going to happen to you, and you can make some decisions that steer it, but life is just going to happen, and your path happens to you.
Okay. Another thing I wanted to bring up is that Mark Patton has really defined his career as an actor based on this movie and the actions of the director and the screenwriter. So, to the director, Mark Patton seems upset, saying, like, how could you not know that this was going to read so gay? And the director saying, I really didn't. I really didn't know. Like, yeah, in the script originally, and this is the language they used in the documentary, that the scene in the gay bar, it was written as like a tranny bar. So,
Transvestite, they
or they
say.
say
Yeah.
transvestite. So he's like, I mean, I didn't acknowledge that, but like, I just wasn't thinking. I just knew that Jesse needed to read more vulnerable. So Mark Patton's attacking him for saying, how could you not know? And then the screenwriter, he's saying, you knew that you wrote this,
As a gay film.
but then you didn't want to acknowledge it because there's an interview that the screenwriter David Chaskin gave later saying, like, yeah, I wrote it as a homophobic movie, but then
Right.
it kind of, because of the lead, it was taken in the opposite way. So basically blaming Mark Patton. And so Mark Patton really held on to that for years and years,
Well, it was the key to his demise.
that he's saying that David Chaskin's words are basically blaming him for ruining the movie.
Yes, like there was a clear culprit because his handlers, his agent, publicist saw that film, that product, and it's like that was the death knell of his career because he seemed too gay.
But here's my question that I would ask Mark Patton. Did you read the script before you accepted the role? Did your agent read the script? When you read it, did it read gay to you? Because if it did, why'd you take the role? And if it didn't, then why are you accusing the director of being so dumb not to know when it's like, well, your dumb ass didn't catch it either. So why would the director catch it?
Well, it's also about, it's probably, we could chalk this up to some communication, is he wasn't allowed to express his fears of seeming gay. So it's like he was waiting for someone to slap his hands and be like, that's too gay, butch it up. Like you need to butch it up. And nobody's around here. The director's not even on that same field.
Like, well, it's also like talking about coding and subtext. It's like that. The entire purpose of that is that it sort of connects with the appropriate audience. Like if this straight dude who seems so clueless doesn't get it, then that's the point.
He's not of the same community. He's not checking for you. It's just like, think of all the black people that have had to work for white directors that are like, this white person has no idea, is not thinking about your experience at all. And they're just, you're a body in front of them and they want you to be all these stereotypes because they're not thinking about that.
The other thing is Mark Patton at this time was not a sort of closeted gay man. He was living with his partner in the Hollywood Hills next to Madonna. His partner was this popular like primetime soap actor. Mm-hmm. He was living the life. He was going to parties, openly gay. This was not someone who was naive in what gay is. So that would be my question to him. Like, girl, you were out here doing all the things, and then you read this script and it's like, you didn't realize that this was going to come off gay? And if the answer is no, I didn't, then why are you blaming everyone else for not knowing? And if you did know that it seemed a little gay, then maybe you shouldn't have taken that role.
Sure.
Because he's also talking like, I had all these opportunities. My career was blowing up. I couldn't work enough. Like there was so much work available for me. Okay, well then if you weren't desperate, why did you take a movie that would paint you like a homosexual? That's my question to him. He's not taking any ownership of like the trajectory of his career and life. The onus is on him to a degree. He's not acknowledging that at all. We don't get anything after A Nightmare on Elm Street 2.
No, he's taken no accountability, although he does have a screen credit, something with John Cameron Mitchell from 1989 that I haven't seen. But we gloss over all those things, but one of them is to avoid, I think, the essence of accountability. But at the same time, he was a victim of a perfect storm, a perfect homophobic storm that the groundwork was already cemented heavily within not just the culture, but Hollywood, because Hollywood is trying to sell itself back to the culture continually. And but also the AIDS crisis, like it was, it was not good timing, but he could have weathered the storm in a way that was more beneficial to him.
Indeed. But, shout out to the documentary because obviously it's a source of some pretty, what I think is interesting conversations. So it's effective.
What struck me is watching it again, the original score for the documentary, I think, is pretty good. But there's power in recuperation, and I think we need more of this because there are still so many people lost to time that we don't remember or think of or recognize were out there doing the same thing that Mark Patton was.
Yeah. Do you recall what you gave the documentary?
3.
I also gave it 3 out of 5. Is there anything else you want to say?
No.
Okay, then we're going to transition into the recording of our discussion after the screening with the Happy Horror Time gentlemen. Thank you.
I'm afraid.
Of what?
I'm afraid I'm going to lose you.
To a dream?
To a dream that might be real.
Hello. All right, everybody, thank you for staying. I'm going to invite our panelists onto the stage. We have two really great queer movie podcasts, Fish Jelly and Happy Horror Time.
Well, thank you so much for inviting us here. Seeing this documentary again, it's so moving. I found myself kind of feeling emotional watching it, even though I've seen it multiple times. And, you know, one thing I noticed in the documentary, there's a lot of talk about A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge, and the subtext and how a lot of people didn't notice anything gay or queer about it, and a lot of people said it was so obvious. And so that's sort of kind of what I want to do to kick off this discussion, is just ask all of you on the panel here, when did you first see A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge? What do you remember about seeing it? Did the gay subtext, the queer undertones of all of it, did it stick out to you? Did you notice it at the time? What's your experience when you think back to when you first saw the movie? What did you think, and how did it affect you in that way?
I saw this as a whole-ass adult about a decade ago, so it was very clear to me. I already knew of the reputation, but to me it doesn't seem subtle at all. But I was also struck by the way they would talk about Mark. They wanted queers to be in the subtext, to be in the closet. That's all the talk about us being scavengers is like, because the main course is for the lions, it's for the heteropatriarchy. But it's funny that they, especially in the early 80s, to talk about Robert Altman, who also was responsible for Mark's fame, directed a movie around the same time called Streamers with Mitchell Lichtenstein, and it was supposed to be a passing gay character, and they all thought he acted too queer. So it's just funny how it was obvious they were talking about it then, but again, watching it as a 30-year-old, it was not surprising at all.
I know I saw this film in 1989 when I was like 11, and the only thing I recall is the coach's butt. It didn't register that it was a gay movie, but then I watched it again with you like 10 years ago, and it's very clear to me that it's a gay movie.
I had no idea. I was so happy to get it from the video store, and I was like 10, and I had a video camera at the time, and it was VHS, so I think it just gave me a license to just be as gay as possible. I mean, like, I always wanted to be the final girl, like they said in this documentary. So I thought it really just opened. I was like, oh, this is fine. This is fine. It wasn't until you hit high school, it's like, oh, maybe this isn't fine. But that was, yeah. So the movie had a big effect on me just because he was screaming and running and all that. So I was like, this is a license for VHS drama.
I saw it as a kid for the first time at a sleepover, and I remember the butt, and I also remember thinking, wow, I hadn't seen a final boy in a horror movie as a kid, because most of the horror movies I saw were with girls. And so I thought that was really cool, but I didn't really notice the gay aspects of it until I was an adult and rewatched it. So it is funny that they do talk about in the documentary how you can miss it, but again, I was like 10 years old. I don't know how an adult can miss the subtext in this. 80s, 90s, whatever decade you're in, I think it's pretty obvious. But again, as a kid, when you weren't even thinking about that, I was just noticing a final boy character going through all of the peril that mostly we saw girls go through in horror movies.
Yeah. I mean, and it's like so many, even in the documentary and listening to what you guys are saying now, it's like, it sort of depends on the lens that you're looking at it through. A lot of us saw it when we're really young, and it kind of, if you're, gay or queer, it kind of, for me, and it sounds like with you guys too, it sort of opened up your world a little bit. Even if when you're watching it, you don't know at the time what the world that's opening up is, it sort of sticks with you, and it kind of leaves a question mark with you, especially if you're young and you're growing up gay, queer, and you don't know it yet or something. And I think that when you're talking about adults who see it today, and it's so obvious, but even still, the adult filmmakers who were making it, the director, that they say it wasn't obvious to them at the time. I just think that's so crazy. And as we're talking here, I don't want you guys to feel like you're restricted just by my question asking. I want to hear your reactions and what you think. But looking at it today, the movie A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge, looking at it through the lens of this documentary, I mean, does it hit differently with you now? Is it, because you can look at it sort of in a funny way, looking at it as like a gay movie, but it clearly for Mark Patton, this has been an emotional thing. So how does that resonate with you?
I personally think it hits all the beats of a rated R horror film. I still don't think it's a gay film. Yes, there's the guy's a little feminine, but I relate to that. So I was like, okay. So I don't look at it as a gay film, even though there's gay undertones, and then everyone's like, oh, they're overtones. But I still just look at it as a rated R 80s horror film. Like, I don't think it changes anything for me personally. The lights are out.
Okay. Whoa. Yeah. Thank you, everybody. It's tough because I've seen the documentary a few times now. We were lucky enough to see it a few months ago at a Warner Brothers Pride event where they had a Q&A afterwards with the filmmakers and Mark Patton. And we got a little bit of an insight into where Mark Patton is at today, because this came out in 2019, but it was filmed more like 2015, 2016, right around the 30th anniversary of the film. And first off, I love Mark Patton. He's so confident. Jesus, he's so confident now in who he is. He like a no BS, no filter type of guy, doesn't hold anything back, completely different from the person he's describing in this documentary, which is so empowering to see. But one thing he mentioned is, number one, he didn't feel like the apology at the end from the writer was a full-fledged apology, and I'm not sure what you guys thought seeing it. To me, it felt a little bit like a cop-out. It was like if you feel bad about that, and I think he kept his composure in the documentary, but he admitted to us it didn't feel like a full-fledged apology. And another thing that I noticed watching the documentary was the director tries to take a lot of onus off himself, like, I didn't know, whereas, he's telling Mark what he wants him to do, saying what he should or shouldn't do, and then claiming I had no idea. So, it's a lot of things that I think Mark explained in this Q&A that was enlightening that you don't get to see in the documentary. But all in all, I think that he has come to a point in his life where he has seen it all, and he now feels really confident about who he is. And it's great that he speaks up for these causes, and he's an activist, and he's a really uplifting person. Sorry, I don't know if that was even close to what you asked.
No, it absolutely was. Go ahead.
Well, I feel silly because I've watched the documentary 3 times. Does Mark talk about what he thought when he read the script? Like, did he think it read gay?
In the documentary, he points out that there are moments that were written when he moves his ass against the drawer in his bedroom in the dance scene. So he seems, to me, I took it that he's indicating that these things were on the page, and that's sort of the central internal struggle that he's having with all of it, because to him all of this stuff was in the script, and in the filmmaking no one is stopping him and saying that he's doing anything wrong. He talked about getting applause for the dance scene and everything. So yeah. And go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that the documentary makes me appreciate A Nightmare on Elm Street 2 more than I did previously, but it feels like a nice recuperative effort, but it's really mostly cathartic for him. And they show a newspaper article talking about McCarthyism, and that's, it's kind of like the world had to be ready for out queer actors, and we still aren't really. If you listen to a recent interview with Kate Winslet talking about people staying in the closet that she knows, but it's like those years that all of those people were blacklisted by McCarthy, and then they come back and they kind of had a career, and that's kind of where it seems like Mark is today, as he's got several films in post-production. So it's nice to see because that's not something that seems evident from the documentary.
Yeah, absolutely. And not to backtrack a little bit, but you were talking about the apology and everything as well. And you're mentioning these things that we're not seeing in the documentary and how his life has turned out since then with his career now. And do you think, despite the not getting the full-throated apology, does it feel like to you all that he got closure still, even so?
I think through making the documentary, and I mean, I've seen the documentary many times. I own it, and I love this soundtrack. So I really think just him existing, because the movie next year is going to be 40 years old. So just him telling his story and everyone seeing it, I think it just, what's the word I'm looking for? Just
no idea.
I know, thank you. That usually helps me. Awareness. Oh, that's not the word. Forget it. Anyway,
I don't know.
I'm just trying to say, like, him existing and telling his story opens door.
Cathartic.
Yeah. That's what I'm trying to say.
You mentioned him saying, or that the director's trying to like throw off responsibility. I kind of interpreted the director telling him, like, girl, if you think that man's going to give you what you need, don't bother. Yeah. Like, that's kind of how I interpreted his reaction.
Yeah, he's kind of saying, you need to let this shit go, God. Yeah. But I think the screenwriter seems real creepy to me, but and not very genuine. But I agree. I don't think that you can see Mark, his posture, his body language, because this is the third time I've seen the documentary. You can see in his eyes there's a lot at stake, I think, in this moment, and this man kind of gives an arbitrary apology. But what is meaningful is Mark interpreting that afterwards by saying that David, wasn't the face of homophobia. David didn't create homophobia, etc. And I think, as he said, he just needed somebody to say, I see you and I'm sorry that you felt this way. And sometimes we just need to hear that.
I'm sorry.
And
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I that when he was talking to the director and the writer, I got a sense from both of them that they're kind of being patronizing, being like, "You stop being such a little faggot," kind of like you're being such a little wussy. Just get over it, kind of thing.
I'm curious to know what because I didn't look up the writer or the director. Like, did they have careers moving forward?
Oh, Jack Sholder directed a fantastic movie after this called The Hidden with Kyle MacLachlan and Michael Nouri. If you haven't seen it, highly recommend it. And before that, he had a film with Jack Palance and Martin Landau called Alone in the Dark. So yeah, he had some stuff.
The reason I bring that up is because I think it's easy to tell him to move on when they've been able to move on and be successful. But this man has clearly, been stopped by this.
No, totally agree. And what I was going to say is that whether he got the apology, full-fledged apology he needed or not, he faced it. So there's one thing, and the third time seeing this documentary, I finally saw this line that the drag queen that's dressed as Freddy Krueger, I forgot her name, says that you need to face your monster head on. And I feel like in a way for Mark, his monster was the writer who had put this on him, and he went and faced him head on. And that alone was enough, I think, for him to get closure. Whether he got the exact words or the apology he needed, he faced the writer. He sat one-on-one. Of course, there were cameras there. He talked with them and he told them how he felt. And so in that way, I think that he probably did get the closure he needed from this documentary.
Yeah, and I think so too. And to something Gregorio just said from the front row over here, even in that pursuit, even in this documentary with director Jack Sholder and the writer, he's still kind of running up against, in a micro way, the same sort of thing from the 80s. I mean, I'm not saying it's the same exact thing, but even when he's trying to talk about it, like you said, Gregorio, they're kind of talking down to him a little bit, being a little condescending, as though this thing that he struggled with is not as consequential as it really is for Mark Patton. I mean, this changed his entire life, the trajectory of his entire life, his whole career, everything. And I think it took a lot of bravery for Mark Patton to do this. And you can see in those final moments in the documentary when he's speaking to the writer, you can see his face trembling. It's everything has led up to that moment. He talks about how before that moment, he didn't expect this. He didn't expect to get this conversation and to have this opportunity. He didn't get it in Florida at the reunion. And so he was getting it at the end of the documentary. And I just think that was really brave of him to really take hold of his own story in this way. And there's such value to it, seeing this documentary. And I just wonder, all of us, we have more experience just through our age, and we're horror fans and movie fans, and we have a perspective on it that is probably different than much younger queer people and how they're going to see it. What do you guys think about how younger people are going to see this documentary? And to me, it's more than just a historical documentary, but yeah, how do you think it's going to resonate with younger people who are not in this room?
I don't think kids today have, they're not even concerned with sexuality, and they're like, oh, my friend's bi, he's anything, they just do not care. But back in 1985 and 87, that was huge. That's closeted and everything. So I just love in this documentary, when the director says, just get over it. He was like, oh, okay. It's just we've learned through therapy and just being, I can't really say we're a wiser society, but it's now more relevant to have therapy, and sexuality is much more open, I think, personally. Yeah.
Well, I think, we have very few people. I think Mark is lucky to have this because there are so many contemporaries that he had. I watch a lot of 80s and 90s movies, and someone resonates with you, and you're like, why didn't that person have a career? They died of AIDS. Why didn't this director have something else? They died of AIDS. So he was at least able to have this and also be associated, as is brought up, with a major franchise that is going to make people pay attention to it already. And I think that as a time capsule, it will come to be worth even more than it is now.
I have a separate question or thought, but because I rewatched A Nightmare on Elm Street 2 last night.
Yeah, go for it.
Do we think that is a good movie? And that he gave a good performance?
Nightmare on Elm Street 2?
I like the special effects in it, and I like the music, and
Can I answer the other question? No. Well, I just want to answer your question real quick, and then go to the Nightmare on Elm Street 2 question. But I think it's really important that younger queer people see something like this and know what people went through in different generations, just because I think that at first glance they may see something like this and think, what's the big deal? There's so much representation out there now, there's so much programming, and being an out gay queer actor isn't as big of a deal. With that said, in 1985, as Mark Patton, being an out gay actor, like he said, suddenly it could have ruined his career. And I think it's just important for people to know, their history and things like that, and how things have changed, and know that we still need to keep changing and still improving. And yeah, and even if you think that, things are a lot better, you have to look out into the world, and there's a lot of improvement that we still need to go through. But yeah, I think that this is something that younger gay audiences I think it can resonate with them, but they may be a little bit confused because they haven't gone through it. But there's things that, even at our age, I didn't go through, but it's great to learn about and to see how we've evolved. In terms of Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, it's tough because, I want to say that I love that movie. It's not my favorite in the franchise because I just love 1 and 3. But seeing this documentary, revisiting a lot, it makes me appreciate more of it. And it's how many horror movies do you get a guy naked in a shower getting his ass slapped? So,
every film is an alchemy, so I'm always curious about the backstory with everything. And I don't, think this is a good film, but there are some really interesting people in it. I mean, Marshall Bell is the coach, who you might recognize from Total Recall. Oscar-nominated actress Hope Lang is the mom, who is dead well before this documentary. And then Clu Gulager is the dad, and he's dead now. So I don't know. Like I like seeing all those people.
Yeah.
It has weird moments, like there's a bird and like burns up randomly, and like there's lightning that hits the dishes. Like there's a lot of things that make no sense, but it's a nightmare, so they can get away with it.
But he comes into the real world at the
Oh yeah, I think
breaks every rule of the franchise.
that's what everyone's so mad about.
I'm gonna have a Mark Patton moment right here and say something I've always wanted to say, which is that I actually love this movie. I have loved it for many years. I think that Mark Patton's performance actually is wonderful. I think that gets lost in all of it. I really do think that he brings the vulnerability and takes the audience on this journey, and I think he's a very honest actor. I mean, he was working with Cher on Broadway before that movie. I think he has the chops for it, but I really do think that gets lost in the more grand discussion about the whole thing. I know not everybody on the panel and in this room probably doesn't necessarily agree on my love for the film itself, but the documentary gives more value to the film, and as it ages, it just sort of becomes this more and more special thing. You would never think that in all these horror franchises, between A Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th and Halloween and Child's Play and so on and so forth, you wouldn't think that there would be an entry in all of those films that would have such a powerful political impact, and that we'd be talking about it in this way. None of these other films and any of these other franchises get talked about in the way that we're all discussing it now, and none of them get a documentary like this. What you're saying does make sense, because even with the resolution at the end of the documentary, they're still showing this imagery of keep fighting, the fight isn't over, and maybe we are in a time right now where young people, like you said, you were kind of talking about how it's sort of flipped. It's not this dark secret thing anymore. It's almost like the freedom of it all with our sexuality and not being straight and all of these, and queerness and all these things today. There's almost a coolness factor to it that is attractive to young people. You can do what you want, be whoever you want. But when I look at the documentary and it's saying at the end, keep fighting, sort of reminding you that how it is in this moment right now doesn't necessarily indicate how it's going to be in the future. Just because it feels better for young people right now and easier doesn't mean that it will be in 5 years. And go ahead.
I was just going to say, and one thing in response to you saying, like, the writer and director, not sure if they're straight or not, but if it was them being straight, not understanding, this queer person's perspective. One person who is straight that I felt like really understood was Robert Englund. He is a straight man. He was very empathetic to Mark Patton. He's always spoken up for him in interviews, and he is not afraid to admit that from day one on set, he knew it was gay. He was playing around with that. He was, so it's almost like I wish that the director and writer had kind of the sensibility or maybe the confidence or security that Robert Englund has, and just the understanding, because it seemed like, even though Robert wasn't in that scene when he was with the cast and they were all discussing, I felt like if he were there, he would have really stuck up for Mark.
Yeah, it almost speaks to the lack of communication and the lack of freedom in conversation that was happening at the time of the filmmaking. The fact that some people, like Robert Englund, totally knew from the beginning. Robert Rusler, who plays Jesse's friend, said
Grady?
Yeah, he plays Grady in the movie. He talked about how he knew at the audition, and yet the director didn't. The writer is being cagey about what he knows and doesn't know, and what he, owning up to what he wrote. And it just really speaks to the fact that even then, with all of these things happening, so much was unspoken. It just depends on where you were standing at the time and what position you were in.
Well, it sounds like a lot was not really subtext. I mean, if it said transvestite bar, I mean, how subtextual are we getting?
Right.
So it's funny how people, they turn a blind eye. They don't want to see the game. It's not their agenda. They don't care. And that Jack Sholder seemed like, I didn't care. I scoped out that gay bar in the middle of the day. I didn't know it was gay. I don't care. It just that's how they come across, like they don't care.
My thought about the screenwriter was that he, I think, was making fun of homosexuals.
Well, I mean, Eddie Murphy was in the clip they showed, so it was part of our culture. Like,
Yeah.
homo was very like an insult, or gay. Like that was on the playground. It was very like I heard it all the time. I mean, I don't know. I guess I lived in a bubble, but I think this should be mandatory viewing for anyone, just because it's a refresher. Just because I was like, oh yeah, like I do remember my life in 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th. grade. So I was like, oh, because you forget about that, like it was the struggle. So, and Freddy Krueger, there's a lot of struggle.
Yeah. Has anyone in the audience, how many of you, it was your first time seeing the documentary? Raise your hand. Okay,
Wow.
Almost everybody here. And how many of you have seen A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge? Less people. Yeah. How many of you are going to go watch A Nightmare on Elm Street 2 now? A number of you are ready to watch it.
How many of you have your Halloween costume already? And I know, sorry.
Yeah.
I will say I felt emotional watching it a third time and just thinking that this man, Mark Patton, like, how could he have known at that age that he did not stand a chance in this career he had embarked on, not knowing that AIDS was around the corner and that he would be so affected. So to see him persevere and find some peace was really beautiful.
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, he had to turn his whole life into something else. He physically ran away from Hollywood.
Although he's a little dirt road, Puerto Vallarta is pretty gay. I don't know.
That's one thing. He's talking about it like he went out living on this desolate place, but he's in sort of the gay mecca of Mexico. But,
I was struggling so much in Ohio. I went to West Hollywood. I was crazy.
They did have to hire a private investigator to find him.
That's true.
Yeah. I was going to make a joke, and I'll do it. I was going to say a private investigator, but sorry.
I thought you would say private dick, but...
Oh, I should have. That would have been better. Anyway.
The truth is, like, Mark Patton, he's now acting again. Like, he's been in different movies. He's embracing it. He's like, he's in a movie called Swallowed, and he plays like a queer, like drug lord. Yeah, and the movie is nuts because, well, just Google it. But anyway, he's embracing it, and he like he's at a point in his career where I think he just doesn't give a fuck, and like he's gonna do whatever he wants, which is great because for someone who had to hide so much, now he's gonna do whatever he wants, play whatever role he wants, gay or not, and is just moving forward.
Yes, it's a beautiful documentary. I think what a privilege to see it on a big screen once again. I think that we're probably wrapping up in terms of time, but does anyone any other comments from the audience, any other questions, or do you just love hearing us? Oh, Kyla, a friend of mine has her hand up.
I need a microphone. I have a question, honestly. Oh, they're recording it. Great.
You could be famous.
So glad I filled in my eyebrows. I honestly, so this is my first time seeing it. It was fantastic. I thought it was very well done. I honestly want to hear from each of you. Do you honestly believe that the writer and director had no idea what the subtext was, or what they were kind of directing and writing for this film, or do you think that they did and now they just kind of didn't fess up to it? So I guess where do you truly believe that they stood?
Well, I think they're in a sticky position now that the politics of things has turned around, and now that with this documentary, audiences are really on Mark Patton's side, and generally, culturally, more people are not homophobic. It's still, of course, homophobia still exists, but things have certainly changed. So I think that factors into what they're going to say publicly now, from my perspective. Jack Sholder, the director, I don't know. You know, it's not just the aspect of having heterosexual men directing, creating something that's clearly to all of us very queer, but it's also the fact that they're Hollywood. You know, there's a disconnect in being sort of these head honchos in Hollywood, the people that are in charge of the casting, that are in charge of actually putting the film together. So I think there's a disconnect there. So it's, to me, I guess, I'm not sure if Jack Sholder, the director, knew, but I feel like the writer had to, and it seems like he's finally, through this documentary, is indicating that, yeah, he was aware of certain things at the time in terms of homosexuality, and that factored in.
I think the writer 100% knew. I think the director reminded me a little bit of my dad, who can be like very flighty in the clouds and oblivious to things. So I think there could be a chance that the director was so oblivious at that time that maybe he didn't quite understand. I think why I was disappointed with him is I just wish he spoke to Mark differently. It was more like, I didn't really understand this, but oh my God, looking back, I see everything you're saying, and wow, I wish I was more aware and on top of it. Like, so meaning you can be oblivious at the time, but make up for it now, and that's what he didn't do. But the writer, come on, he knew.
I think the writer definitely knew because he admitted it. And then the director, I feel like he was trying to. He said he had anxiety from pre-production, production. What's the final one? Thank you. So I feel like he was trying to get a movie out, and they were trying something new with a feminine guy, and I think he was just rushed. But I'm not excusing him. I think deep down he knew.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do I think the director thought he was making a gay movie? No. Do I think the screenwriter knew he had gay elements to it? Yes, but I thought he was making fun of homosexuals in the way they did in the 80s. So it's being, it was interpreted differently than what he intended. So I guess that's what I think.
I'm willing to give Jack Sholder the benefit of the doubt that he was stressed out and just that wasn't on his radar. And also depictions of masculinity were starting to change by the 80s. We had Richard Gere in American Gigolo. We had Revenge of the Nerds. But the screenwriter, I think, is it Maya Angelou who says when someone shows you who they are,
believe them.
He had a pretty well articulated statement in that interview that's brought up about how any woman's love can cure a gay man. And I think that is what he was thinking. And he now knows he doesn't need to say that. And reading between the lines of that half-assed apology is, I don't want to promote homophobia. That's where his little brain is.
Yeah, and I think that whatever the writer's intentions were, the film did not age in the direction that lines up with his intentions. It doesn't feel, to me, homophobic. It feels queer. All right.
Thank you.
And thank you. But thank you, Gregorio, for having us on this panel. Thank you for putting together this screening of Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street. And thank you for having us at the Philosophical Research Society.
Did you guys want to say anything about your individual podcasts before we go?
We're Fish Jelly on YouTube. We have a podcast on all platforms. We have Patreon. Give us money if you want.
You have millions of views on YouTube.
We do. We sell merchandise.
Oh, and it looks like someone, before we go, one other thing. And yeah.
And I've been dying to know this. Why don't you say hit the thanks button no more?
The what?
The thanks button.
You don't say hit the thanks button anymore.
Oh, I'd rather direct that revenue to Patreon. So that's why I say join us on Patreon.
We're Happy Horror Time. We're on Facebook, Instagram, X, Twitter, and now TikTok. Yeah, now we're on TikTok. I mean, if you like, we review new releases, but in our Patreon, we review movies from the past, like Nightmare on Elm Street 2, and we interview people from horror movies. We're trying to get an interview with Mark Patton, but
He's a busy guy.
He's a busy guy. We've talked to other people from the Nightmare series, so it's been fun. So if you like horror, look into us.
Yeah, at Happy Horror Time.
So, Nick and Joseph, what would you give this movie?
2.
Wait, no, the documentary.
The documentary 3.
Yeah, the documentary.
I would give it 3 out of 5. I think it's good.
Okay. Do you guys rate on your podcast? I don't know. Do you do a rating?
They don't. These guys, they don't do
don't have,
ratings.
like, an
They just sort of
official
give their vibes and feelings.
Okay. Well, any last words on it?
Oh, my feeling is I love Nightmare 2 and I love the documentary. I love it.
I love the documentary. I think it's again, it's like I can watch it multiple times and not get bored. Nightmare 2, I don't love it as much as Jacob. I appreciate it.
It's a blast. It's really well made. The visual effects, I mean, the practical effects. And it has Mark Patton, who is just brilliant. So,
well, has anyone here seen Mark Patton's movie that he was in? Come Back to the Five and Dime, Jimmy Dean. It's a great film. We've been trying to get it to screen here in Queer Diaspora. I mean, it's got him, Karen Black, Cher,
Sandy Dennis,
Kathy Bates. Like it's amazing. So
I would see that here. I would love if you could get that screened here. I'll be here.
Yeah,
we'll have a Q&A afterwards with Cher.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much. We've got everyone's QR codes on here. You can follow them. Follow me on Queer Diaspora if you want to check out and see what's going on with our future screenings. And I want to thank you guys so much for being here, and we really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having us. We are so grateful to have been invited. This has been so much fun.
Yes, thank you. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.